We just went live.
Oh, okay.
You want to check it, Catherine?
I'm going to stop the computer. I'll just use my phone. Thanks.
Okay. All right. I think we're all set. Okay. We'll call to order the November 12th special meeting of the Chagrin Falls Board of Education. Ms. Brudno, if you would please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin.
Here.
Mr. Kinziger.
Here.
Mrs. Bros.
Here.
Mrs. Garvey.
Here.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Here.
All right. If everybody would join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the
To the
flag
flag
of the
of the
United
United States of America
and to the republic
for which
for
it
which it
stands,
stands, one nation,
And
under God,
God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Good job, everybody. Okay. And now I'm going to turn over the meeting to Dr. Hunt.
Thank you and good afternoon. I want to thank the Board of Education for making time to come together for a special meeting. Before we jump into the agenda, I think it's the first time publicly we've been together after the levy. I'd like to thank Marlo Peck, Tammy Chase, Carrie Hawk, and our board reps, Mrs. O'Toole, Mr. Kanzinger, and certainly recognize and thank the Chagrin community for their tremendous support. We do not take it, for granted or lightly when we are on the ballot, and certainly very appreciative of the support, and we'll continue to work diligently to stretch every dollar as far as we can. So the purpose of this meeting is I felt it was appropriate to bring the Board of Education together due to the recent attention in the media given, to the rising cases of COVID-19 throughout the nation, state, and even locally. The goal is to provide the board with some current data and information and maybe focus more specifically on our area or school district and allow you to ask questions, provide any feedback or thoughts you have from a board perspective. I'll acknowledge this is an extremely difficult decision in which both sides can be substantiated, and certainly opinions on both sides that I've heard from over the last couple of weeks. I think it's appropriate we start at a higher level, and I want to thank Joliet County Health Commissioner Tom Quaid for being here to speak to us really about the local landscape and provide the board with an opportunity to ask him questions specifically. I've often referred to you in our meetings, Tom, but I thought it'd be nice to bring you to the meeting. After Tom, I know because he's got a commitment to get to shortly after 5, we'll ask Chris Woofter to handle updating the board on staff cases, and Jen Banco to give us an update on student cases, and then kind of close by sharing information on what is playing out with some of our local, or how this is playing out with some of our other local schools. So I want to thank, again, Tom Quaid. Tom's been an excellent partner through this, really supportive. Anytime we've had questions, concerns, with our plan or different things we're thinking, they are extremely responsible. I can't imagine, well, maybe I can imagine the stress and the pressure a little bit, but to add layers beyond the school and all the things that you're dealing with to coordinate to try to help keep this thing down is truly amazing. And that you're able to serve with, this entire county with the staff that you have is also amazing. So thanks, Tom. And I guess I'd ask you maybe just to make some general comments about uptick, what we're seeing, what we're facing, and then I may have some questions. The board certainly jump in, and we'll certainly be respectful of your time. So I'd like to turn it over to you at this point.
Sure, thanks. And always glad to be here. Whenever you have questions, please ask. If you want me to attend other meetings, that's fine. If you just want to reach out, that's fine. That's most of what we're doing right now, is doing our best to answer questions, primarily because it's a fairly volatile time in terms of the data and what the data are showing us, and then trying to apply that data to a variety of different situations. Because frankly, I've learned so much more about school districts and the variation in terms of capacity and the different decisions that need to be made this year more than than ever before. So take with a grain of salt the information I'm about to give, because it's applicable in different ways to different schools. All right, so there's no one answer that's going to fit everybody, other with the exception of we're here to help, and we can support pretty much any decision that any school district is going to make, frankly, because we're on the same page in terms of priority. We want, not only do we want kids to learn in the best environment, we share the understanding that that's typically in person, and we balance that against their safety and their health. And so, this is one of the bright spots in all of this, is my ability to work with the school districts, and not in a antagonistic way, which is always welcome. So just in general, where we are now is miles away. It's on a different planet, really, than where we were back in March and April. On the downside, we're really at least tenfold in terms of the number of cases that we were seeing back then. In general, at the outset, we were seeing a couple of cases a week. And we pretty quickly ramped up to 4, 5, 6, 7 cases a day. And frankly, over the summer, that's about where we were, anywhere between 5 and 10 cases a day. We've seen 25% of all of the cases that we've seen since day one, we saw in October. That's the magnitude of jump we saw from leading up to this point into October. I'm wishing we were where we were in October, as we're in November. Right now we're seeing, a couple of days ago, we had more than 70 cases. We're staffed for about 5 to 10. And these are new cases in a day. Each of those cases will represent anywhere from maybe half a dozen to over 2 dozen contacts. We try to reach out to all of those. Again, this is one of our challenges at the health department. So we have the backdrop of state data, state communication, and the information that the governor puts out on a regular basis. One of those being the public health advisory system map, and that level where we go yellow, orange, red, purple. Those are based on 7 different indicators, 7 different metrics. Those metrics are very useful when comparing county to county, and much less useful when looking within a county. And that's why, originally back in the summertime, when we were all working together to put together our back to school plans, we made a lot of assumptions based on the information we had at the time. And so some school districts tied their decisions with regard to in-person versus remote versus hybrid to those state levels. And frankly, some of the school districts that did that are trying to untie that right now, because again, we learned a little bit more. We made some assumptions that if our cases got to a certain point, that it was probably going to be related to the rise in incidents related to schools going back in session. We made that assumption. It was a logical assumption, right? Most of the spread that we were seeing from the beginning through August was tied primarily to congregate settings. And in Ohio, we really have 3 types of congregate settings. I try not to suggest that they're parallel in any other way other than they're congregate, but we have long-term care facilities, we have prisons, and we have schools. Again, the only thing they have in common is that they're in congregate settings. But the reality is, whenever we're pulling large populations together for periods of time, especially as it relates to communicable disease, we tend to see an increase in transmission because we're in environments that are sort of conditioned for transmission. The big difference between prisons, lots of differences in terms of communicable disease spread, the big difference between prisons, long-term care facilities, and schools is that schools have been uniquely able to and uniquely proficient at putting in place the strategies that prevent the spread. And can't thank folks enough for all of the effort and all of the investment that's been done in making sure that schools are as safe as they can possibly be. I think it's been very effective. We haven't seen any data that suggests we're seeing increases in that are associated with school populations. And I say that very carefully because, and again, I'll say it again, the data have not suggested we're seeing spread associated with students returning to school populations or school settings. We're probably not going to, frankly. So, you know, there's a little bit of a caveat there. We're not seeing it. We want to be data driven in our decision making. We want you to be data driven in your decision making. But the data aren't showing that there's a reason to suspect that schools are super spreader. I will also say, though, that because children are asymptomatic, typically are more likely to be asymptomatic, that there could be spread going on that's just frankly not going to show up in the data, right? We want to acknowledge that. I think it's responsible to acknowledge that. So we're making sure we're paying attention to the adult population that are also tied to the academic environment, not just the teachers, but the other staff and administrators. Frankly, we're seeing some cases of school bus drivers, and I think that's one example that is important to recognize because that's tied very specifically to capacity to operate. And so I'm going to use that as the bridge to the things that to think about in terms of return to in school or using the remote learning. And that's related to your capacity to operate, but it's also related to our capacity at the public health department to respond. And so I've communicated out to all the superintendents. Really, I don't think the decisions at this point to go remote or not go remote are necessarily tied to the specifics on that public health advisory system, as much as they should be tied to your capacity to operate and our capacity to assist in the event of an outbreak. On the school district's end, that's going to be tied to to personnel and so forth. And I'm not even going to go there. You guys, you know how to do that, right? We have outbreaks of different situations that occur in school settings, and you all make those decisions just fine without us. Obviously, reach out when you want, but the capacity on our end to do the outbreak investigation if there's an outbreak, those are the things where at some point, if we hit that capacity, we may be reaching out and saying, look, we really think you ought to consider going remote or doing this or making this change. Not there yet, but boy, we're sort of this close on our end. So there's sort of a heads up in terms of the environment. But the data right now don't suggest that folks should be going remote. They do suggest that you should be thinking about if we needed to, how we would do that. We will certainly support that smooth transition to the extent that it can be smooth, if that's what's called for. So it won't be a, hey, the health department says you got to do it tomorrow. But I will be reaching out to superintendents prior to any type of communication to the public at large with regard to the need to do that if that's what's called for. So that's really about where we are right now. Some folks ask for more specific geographic data in terms of cases. I will say that has kind of limited epidemiological value and decision-making value on your end because that data is tied to residents. It's not tied to transmission. Unless people are actually living, working, congregating, worshiping, playing, socializing within their zip code really doesn't matter much because what we're talking about is where folks are actually getting it in terms of what the risks are. So that's sort of where we are right now. Bob, if you've got other questions or the rest of you, I'd be happy to.
Can I ask 2 quick questions, Tom?
Sure.
The first is has there been any quantification of the children being asymptomatic? Do we have any idea the scope of that population?
It's a good question, but frankly, absent random samples of testing in environments, it's pretty impossible to guess. Nationally, there have been estimates that it's maybe as high as 70 to 80% of children are asymptomatic. Now, it's important to understand that asymptomatic does not mean not contagious. They're just as likely to be spreading when they're asymptomatic, just as adults are. And I haven't seen any data that suggests that that children are less contagious, are less able to infect others, but certainly they are less likely to be symptomatic themselves.
And then it sounds like the county is closer to recommending or moving towards virtual for the school systems than I imagined before coming on this call. If that happens, would you be doing it on a school system by school system basis or the whole county?
I wish I had that specific answer. What I'll be doing is I'll be reaching out to the superintendents individually first, or on their superintendent's calls, because what I don't want to do is box anybody into a corner. If on that call, if it's at the point where I think everybody should be going, I'll throw out that weather balloon and see what sort of response we get. If it's not everybody can do it, then the recommendations will be coming out school district by school district based, and again, they'll be tied to your capacity as well as ours. If a school district has the capacity to do some self case identification and is very aggressive in its quarantining in the event that a case is identified, it could be something that I could support and say, don't necessarily recommend that you're at that place. The more I do that, the less the recommendation means, clearly, right? Because you're recommending in two different directions, it doesn't mean so much. I will say that in terms of the being closer to making that recommendation, I do want to be clear that that's the direction the arrow's pointed. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're on the verge of making that recommendation. But again, 2 weeks ago, I just said we're quite some way away from that. I think on one of those calls back then, I described it as saying now's the time to sort of tap the brakes and make sure they work. Right now, I'd say we're on an icy road. It's time to tap the brakes to make sure that they work because we know we're on an icy road. That doesn't necessarily mean that you got to pull off the road. It just means, it's Geauga County, right? The roads are going to be icy. It just means that we need to be attentive to those indicators as they come.
So just one more question, and then I'll let other people ask questions. But when you talk about the arrows pointing in that direction, are you also considering things like, over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're going to have college students coming home, and then it's holidays and the family? Is that all built in, or is that like another layer that?
That's another layer. Frankly, we've seen this exponential growth in cases in advance of that. There's nothing to suggest that that's going to make them go down. Our college kids really aren't doing much of us any favors right now. Yeah.
So Ted, one thing you said, it was a piece of data that I hadn't heard before. I think you said that 70 to 80% of kids are asymptomatic. That's
an estimate, and that's based on just sort of national numbers. There's been no specific look at that in Ohio, even to my knowledge, simply because to do that, you essentially have to have a testing protocol in place where you're rapidly and frequently testing the student population and having some ability to compare that to a
right
population. So yeah,
right.
those are very rough estimates.
Okay, so that's not like a hard fast number from the CDC or anything like that.
No, no, that's
okay.
And a lot of this is just that reminder that although it feels like it's been forever that we've been dealing with this, it's not been. I mean, again, you think of our history with schools or with students in school. We're 2 months in, or 2.5 months in. So there's really not much in the way of data or evidence at this point. A year from now, we'll be able to predict backwards, but yeah.
You consider a kid 18 and under?
I'd actually, in terms of being asymptomatic, I would actually drop that down to probably like a 12 and under. The 13-year-old's immune system is probably much more like a 20-year-old's than it is a 10-year-old's. So again, these are very rough, broad statements, but yeah. Sorry, it's my wife wondering where I am.
Do you have any information on, I guess I'm comparing soccer to basketball. whereas soccer's outside, basketball's inside.
Yeah, so
Because basketball's inside, is it more apt to spread in a gym than it is in a field? Is there enough space in a gym that it should be roughly the same?
yeah, the reality is anytime it's a full spectrum here. So hold on just one second. I've got a question here. Okay, all right. Okay, sorry. So we have, especially when it comes to anything extracurricular, right? If the primary goal is to have kids in school, then what I've been asking folks to do is take a look at anything that's extracurricular. You have some things that are just as safe as a kid sitting at a desk in a classroom, and you have some things that are entirely the opposite end of the spectrum. And I'll throw out wrestling, right, as one of those examples. It's not for 15 minutes. I get it, but you talk about in your face. It's right there. So there's this full gamut in between. Things that are outside are clearly safer than things that are inside. The part of the problem with basketball is it's quite exertional, and it's inside. So you have a lot of huffing and puffing, and you have even though they're only probably in dyads or triads, you have folks that are up in each other's space. Again, it's not for 15 minutes per interaction, but it's repeated, and it's up close and personal. Soccer, the difference there, again, only probably slightly different in terms of the amount of contact. It is outside, and that's a huge difference there. To try to say, to put every extracurricular, on that spectrum, I'm not going to pretend that I know enough about the athletics to stack one next to the other. But yeah, that's the primary difference between something like soccer and something like basketball. And again, those sorts of decisions in terms of which ones you do, which ones you postpone or curtail altogether, those are going to be sort of district by district. And I understand they bump into other districts because you play each other. So, which is one of the other challenges. One of the principles behind the prevention is the cohorting idea. So you have fewer folks mingling with folks from outside of your original cohort, which is one of the other challenges, especially with athletics, that you wouldn't otherwise see.
Tom, I know the state has a pilot right now of rapid testing, I think in 7 school districts. Do you know how long that pilot's supposed to last and what we hope to learn from that?
I don't know how long it's supposed to last. Frankly, keeping up with a lot of this is a bit like drinking from a fire hose. At the same time, we're trying to hold on to the fire hose and use it. So it's a little bit of a challenge there. What they're trying to find out are some of the actual questions that have arisen in terms of the amount of spread that's actually occurring in a school, the relative risk of students in different environments. And the degree to which maybe some of that undercurrent of student exposure and the prevalence of the disease among the student body that's undetected, how that may have an impact on the adults in the room, whether it's a teacher, the other staff, or the bus drivers, whatnot. That's what they're all trying to learn with that. They're going to be able to probably answer some of those questions to some degree. But again, these are the things that we will know a year from now, 2 years from now. Hopefully that is all just historical context and is not going to be guiding policy in the year 2024 when this is still going on. I hope that's not the case, but that's why they're doing it now, it's to guide policy down the road.
Mary Kay, I have a contact in one of the districts that's piloting. They're having trouble with the number of tests, getting the number of tests that they need. So that's a challenge with the pilot right now. Tom, I want to clarify one thing, because right now we're working under a recommendation from Cuyahoga County in red that basically says we should be remote. And when we dug into that, a recommendation is different than an order, assuming the same flexibility. I don't know if you want to call it flexibility. Certainly we would take it very seriously, but I just want to clarify, would you be putting out an order or a recommendation?
Yeah, so without stating the obvious, the politics are different in Cuyahoga County than they are in Cuyahoga County, and legal authority of the health department is very much tied to that. So number one on that on that basis alone, we're not going to be ordering anything, frankly. We will be, if we need to, it would be a recommendation, but understand with that context that that recommendation would be primarily because we couldn't order. So you know, sort of read between the lines on that one. The other difference, though, between Geauga County's recommendation to go remote and a decision we might make with regard to a recommendation to go remote is Geauga County did tie, or at least in the past, I don't know if they've changed it since, but tied a lot of their guidance to that state advisory level system. And so when the Geauga County went red, it came with it a trigger to do things like have the schools go remote and so forth. There's many reasons for that. It's a much larger, much more complex county with many more school districts and all of that. So sometimes you get to that point where those become sort of arbitrarily tied to. We like to be more flexible and more nuanced, given the partnerships we have in Geauga County with the school districts. But to answer your question, you're not going to get an order anyway. At the strongest is going to be a recommendation.
Yeah, I think with the advisory system, we were all just searching for a hat, somewhere to hang our hat on to give some action for our communities. And, the governor, and we've learned about it more. I mean, the governor has, essentially said repeatedly, don't tie your school district decision to that advisory system. So it makes sense. So thank you for that clarification. Sure. Is there anyone else on the board that has questions for Tom?
I have one, but I suspect that your answer will be similar to others, but more about your predictive abilities of where this is going, and more specifically in schools. So if schools stay with the same model of education in Geauga County that they have today, have you looked at the incidents you would be expecting, for example, between now and the end of the year? Or is that you're just not doing that predictive?
Yeah, I wish I had those skills. The best I can say is at this point, right? We don't have the data from school students that would allow us to populate any sort of mathematical model to do that. So it's really just applying a logical model as opposed to a mathematical model. Because we're not seeing or we don't have evidence to believe that our current increase in cases in the community is tied to the students in the school. The likelihood of continued increase of community spread is more likely to be, again, as was mentioned earlier, the activity, the socialization of the folks that are out there saying, hey, I'm home on holiday, or that they're just plain old tired of restricting themselves in their social interactions with family and friends, especially as we move indoors and we get into that season where we get together. It's more likely to be driven by that. So do I think that community spread in Geauga County is going to go up between now and the end of the year? Yeah. Do I think it's going to go up a lot? I kind of think it probably is. What that means with regard to schools, if it's not, if we don't have reason to believe that it's being spread because of students being in the schools, and again, remember that the thing that gives me a little bit of peace of mind that it's not being driven by some underlying unidentified spreading event among students that are asymptomatic is because schools are that environment where you do have a lot of rules in place and a lot of structure in place to prevent it. And that's the one thing that gives me peace of mind that's not being spread in the schools, is because you have the barriers, you have the distancing, you have the hand sanitizing, you have protocols in place that say, if you're sick, don't come in. We've had exceptional cooperation in the case contact tracing from the school administration. So those are the things that make me think that schools are probably still a decent place for kids to be. Frankly, also, you take them out of schools and they're just as likely to socialize outside at home. They're not going to have the same number of hours in. They're going to be, more separated from their friends and so forth. So yeah, I think the number is going to get worse, but I don't think it's going to be because of the schools. And so, like I said, it's more likely that we would be making a recommendation to go remote based on our inability to keep up with the community spread, more so than the school's ability to maintain a health and safe learning environment for the kids.
So I hear you.
Sorry, Sharon, let me do a quick follow-up.
Well, what, can we just ask about the staff in that capacity? Because we're talking about capacity to operate both on the Geauga County level and the school district level, and feeling somewhat comfortable that the students are safer in the not safer, but there are procedures put in place that are keeping student spread from being a real issue. But I don't know what where we're supposed to land on the safety of our staff.
Well, yeah. So the staff are in that same environment, right? So in terms of the safety of staff, I'd say that the staff have really the same protections in place as the students do. The primary difference between the staff, the adults in the room at the school, and the students is that the adults are far more likely to have a worse negative outcome as a result of being infected than the students are. It's really more on the outcome and the risk associated, or not the risk, but the consequence of being, but they're at no greater risk. They just are likely to have a worse outcome given the same risk, right? So if you flip a coin and you're going to get it if you flip heads 5 times in a row, right? So the risk is the same for both the student and the teacher. The difference is if the student gets it, no one might ever know, because the student could be asymptomatic. They're just going to blah, blah, blah. The difference is if the adult gets it, they're more likely, again, still only about 20% of those folks that get infected are going to be symptomatic, right? 1 in 5, and it's not a very pleasant experience from what I understand. And then, of that 1 in 5, 1 in 10 are likely to go to the hospital. And of that 1 in 10, of that 1 in 5 who end up in the hospital, 1 in 10 of them, may pass on. So, it's the odds get longer, but the consequence gets more severe.
So
Sorry, Catherine, I didn't mean to steamroll you.
I'm sorry.
I guess I wanted to ask if so the spread, we can expect the increase of cases to parallel the spread in our communities. Not that it's being spread in the schools, but our students are going to show up having come from community settings or having members of their household get the disease. And so we are going to see an increase in cases no matter what we do if the spread continues in both counties to grow the way that it has. Do you have a projection on where Geauga County is headed in the next 4 to 6 weeks as far as what that growth could be? Is it like a percentage?
Again, there's so much of this that we just don't have anything to base a prediction on. At this point, anytime we have policy change at the state level, it's a delayed response, but we do have a response, and that is either that we see an increase in cases or we see a decrease in cases. Mm-hmm. We did see, the 4 to 6 weeks after the mask mandate and so forth, at the state level, we saw a decrease. Didn't see that much here because we have a number of folks that say that doesn't really matter about the state mandate. We're going to do what we want. We had some additional folks that masked up as a consequence, but we didn't really see that major drop. On the reverse side, we had the policy change, which I don't disagree with, but it came with the consequence of back in sort of June 1, when all of the businesses started opening up. About 6 weeks later, 5-6 weeks later, we started to see an increase in the cases. It was to be expected. It's a natural consequence of folks, being, mingling more. Again, in terms of the exponential growth, I don't know. I hope it doesn't follow the same trajectory it's been on in the last couple of weeks, because again, we went from 5 to 10 a day to 50 to 70 a day. We can't handle 1,000 a day. So I don't know. I wish I did, but I don't know.
Well, one of the things that we're considering is relaxing a little bit of our social distancing in one of our elementary buildings. So one of the concerns, I would think from your perspective and my perspective is that as we are seeing community spread, we're going to have students in the building then with staff and potentially more of that ripple effect impact when a student does arrive in the building who is sick.
Mhm.
Maybe they don't know they're sick, right? So now there's a larger number of contact tracing that has to be done because there's been more contact within that 6-foot limitation, for more than 15 minutes. So I guess it's not really a question for you. It's an observation. I think that there is potential in us relaxing the social distancing and having kids in classrooms all day. If they can't maintain that 6-foot distance, that there would be a larger ripple effect when a student is testing positive.
Yeah, in general, I'd say yes. But there are some things that you can do to mitigate that a bit, because we've had a number of schools in the county where the 6-foot thing just wasn't feasible. It wasn't going to work, and they just said, "Look, we need to open, but here's the situation." So what we've done, and again, this is sort of a big math problem, in the idea of cohorting. So when we have a situation, if you've got 20 desks in a room, and you can only separate those 20 desks geometrically by 3 feet apiece, then one of the things we suggest is to say, well, we cohort in dyads. So you put 2 desks face to face. Now on the one level, that seems idiotic because now you have 2 people that are just 2 feet apart or a foot apart. But on the flip side, now you've gone from 20 desks to 10 desks. You have 2 people at each one, but now you can separate them. And it's sort of the same idea that has been kind of behind the logic in restaurants. And you're saying, well, we can have more people at a table, but the tables have to be further apart. The downside to that one is that every time you have a group of people at one of those tables, it's a different group of people, right? So that's where that logic fell apart in the restaurants. But within a classroom setting, again, this is where you have opportunities to exercise a lot more control in terms of some of those preventive strategies. And when you have a dyad or even a triad where you have a table or 3 desks that are pointed together, and now they're 10 feet from that other desk or that other cluster of desks, you're increasing the likelihood that if one of those people has it, that the other 1 or 2 will get it. But you greatly decrease the idea that either the teacher or the other students in the classroom are going to get it. And frankly, in some regard, that's going to decrease the number of folks that would be quarantined, because even at 6 feet, we're urging on the side of caution to say, even if you're at 6 feet, if you're the neighbor of that case, consider that quarantine. I mean, we're not ordering it at 6 feet. I mean, there's a reason we said 6 feet apart. But we do want folks to lean into prevention as hard as they can, understanding that there are limits to that.
Okay, Tom, we're about 10 minutes past when you said you could stay. So I appreciate
I built it in. I built it in.
Must have experience with these meetings. I appreciate very much your support of not only our school, but everything you're doing for schools in Geauga County. I think the information was very helpful tonight, and we're gonna continue the conversations, because I think some of what you've intimated and talked about, we can talk about and see how it's playing out in our school district. So I'm gonna let you get on to your next battle over, whatever it might be.
Christmas tree lightings. That's what's next.
I didn't want to say it. I knew it was coming, but I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I didn't want to drop that. So I'll get you to Christmas tree lighting, and we'll move on. So thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care.
I'd like to move to looking, now that we've kind of looked at Geauga County, talked a little bit about state advisory system, really talk about what's happening locally in our schools. The way we've kind of divided the workload for this is Chris Woofter handles any potential staff cases, contact tracing for staff through the HR department, and then Jen Banco through Pupil Services handles that for students. So I asked them both to kind of give us a snapshot of what we've seen, some of the implications. You can put numbers on the website and put it on a dashboard, but there's a bit of a story behind what's going on, and I think it's important for the board to understand that, and then ask whatever questions you have. And I think it'll play off of some of the things that we've talked about. So why don't we start with staff first, Chris, and talk about that. Before I turn it over, I do want to just thank both of these individuals. This is one that falls in the category of other duties as assigned. And it's one of those things that, I know we're on the phone almost every weekend with potential things, and they're reaching out and contact tracing. So it's certainly been, an additional responsibility that takes way more time than people would realize. So I appreciate them getting trained, taking this seriously. And part of our success is undoubtedly not only where we're at today, but going forward in our ability to get on these things quickly, quarantine who needs to be, quarantine, and make those decisions in a manner that makes sense. Because as you heard from Tom, and we heard this from Cuyahoga County, they cannot keep up with the contact tracing right now. So to have resources that we can allocate and do this locally is almost a necessity. So Chris, why don't you talk with staff, and then we'll move into Jen talk student.
Thank you, Dr. Hunt. I will start off with thanking Mrs. Banco specifically for all of her help. And, I really grateful for somebody that we can work with as a team. Also our school nurse, Debbie Elam, as well, too. The three of us are often asking one another questions and kind of consulting the health department and reviewing all of the information to just cross-check and fact-check. So really appreciate a team approach to that too. I'll also say, kind of as a leading comment, this is a very hard thing to do well, because this is confidential medical information that we're dealing with here. We have to be very sensitive and careful about how we work with this information. And yet, when the information is anonymous, it's actually being required by the state to report out the information as well too. So those are two very different, things, and it's really nuanced. And I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind and remember that and handle the information accordingly. And I think we've done a really good job as a district in that, but we always have to continually remind one another this is confidential medical information, and that the need to publicly report what's required with diligence and accuracy. So high degree of fidelity there. I'm going to start with kind of the dashboard on the staff side. Right now, our dashboard has the top number on the staff has 3 new cases. Those cases run from the date of the 9th to the 15th. And I just want to make sure everybody understands what we define as a case. A case is someone who has tested positive for COVID or has been diagnosed as positive by a medical doctor as COVID positive based on symptoms. So those are the 2 ways that someone becomes a COVID case. The next number, 3 active staff cases. That's actually those cases that are currently in isolation protocol. Those are those same 3 new cases as well too. So that's not additional. It's not an add number. That's just those active cases right now. And then if you jump down, there's a cumulative staff. That's the total number of staff that have been COVID cases since we started taking this data on the 1st of August. So, you can almost see, of almost half of the cases have been really recently. I'm going to get a little bit more into some of the data here and just kind of stick to the facts. I thought what I would do is just kind of tell you what the dates of the reporting was on the cases that ended up being positive COVID cases. So this is the date of reporting. So in other words, these were the first that we learned about a case. Doesn't mean the date that the person was diagnosed as COVID positive or tested positive, but maybe they had symptom onset at that point. Maybe they were in close contact with a known COVID positive and required to quarantine. So those dates, I'm just going to kind of tell you, because if you think about these, you'll kind of see the timeline here. August 18th, first case, second case, October 21st, third case, October 28th, fourth case, October 29th, fifth case, October 4th, sixth case, October 4th. I'm sorry, the fifth case was November 4th, sixth case was November 4th, and the 7th case was November 9th. So you can kind of see those if you just, you can see those being clustered really more in the last 2 weeks. Another number I'm going to give you as well too is the number 28. And that number 28 is actually a total number of the number of it includes the number of staff that were COVID positive or COVID cases. That number 7 is inside the 28. Number of people that were quarantined for COVID or ordered to quarantine for COVID that may or may not have, those are, and then the number of people who were COVID symptomatic or symptomatic seeking a diagnosis. So those people, even though they're not ordered to quarantine, if they're symptomatic, they're not working, they're away, and we're tracking those people as well. And we do pre-contact tracing with those individuals as well too. So that number 28, I looked at the data, and between the dates of November 2nd and today, November 12th, 15 of those 28 cases were active during that time. So kind of gives you almost a spread that, the last 3 weeks, just anecdotally, have been certainly more busy than the first part of the school year right there. And typically, and I think I'm just going to stop there. I think that's kind of a decent summary of staff as it relates to, the amount and the type and such too. And then, yeah, I'll pause.
Can you make any comments regarding where we're seeing transmission taking place, and or where exposure is taking place, which goes into quarantine?
Yeah, now some, of all of this, and I don't have this graphed out at all, but just anecdotally, just from these 28 cases, some of them are known COVID cases. So in other words, I have a known close contact, my uncle, my brother-in-law who was over for the weekend, that's a close contact. They contacted me, and, within 48 hours, they were COVID positive. So I know I'm a close contact. I'm going to quarantine. I'd say that's the majority of close contact that we have. Then some people are just symptomatic. They don't know if they're, COVID symptomatic or a cold. But really, of the transmissions that we've had, and I don't have the data in front of me, but almost exclusively, we don't have a close contact. We don't have a close contact of a transmission that occurred at school. And so that's really important to know. We do have close contacts that occurred either in the community or, with family or a known or a known source. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been transmission at school. It just means that we don't have any known close contacts where there were transmissions that we trace back to school.
Okay.
I don't know if that summarized it well or not.
Yeah. And I would say the area, we'll talk about other districts and what we're seeing and what we're hearing. The staff cases and staff quarantine, vast majority happening outside of school, but are causing the issues in terms of the capacity to keep districts open. You have local school districts that had to email parents and say we can't transport, or we're limited transporting, or we're shutting down because of a certain grade level because we just can't staff it. That's where the pressure point seems to be coming with the adults rather than students in most school districts that we're talking with. Jen, do you want to cover the students for me?
I just want to add one thing to kind of bolster, Bob, what you're saying, and that is that when staff are out, these numbers, they're out for a good portion of time, 14 days, sometimes a little longer, depending on medical diagnosis and return. And so, these cases end up being, a long coverage time for substitute teachers, which is different than a typical somebody that's typically out for a couple of days. They get treated and then come back. So that is causing us some challenge, and we're definitely being stretched on the staffing for attendance side too.
Bob, does hybrid or full day have any impact on staffing capacity from the district perspective?
No, we will face the issues either way. If in fact, you could make the argument that if we're a full day, there's a little more flexibility with staff to kind of move people around and support what's going on. The other thing that Chris didn't cover is, when we can, if someone's quarantined, not, experiencing symptoms, we have made decisions to allow them to, teach from home, continue to move, students forward. So we do try to work with our folks in that. So there's kind of a mixture. It's not all or nothing. You're out and you're not doing anything. There are, examples where students, still have access to their teacher.
So like sticking with the staffing capacity questions, I didn't really fully understand the way Gurney was being implemented. My understanding now is that so maybe you can speak to if a staff member, if we end up with capacity issues for staffing at Gurney, the virtual kids were assigned to virtual classes and those are sort of running parallel there, but students who are at home at Gurney are not participating in a live classroom setting, right? There aren't cameras at Gurney, right? So we're more vulnerable to entire classes being shut down at the Gurney level because the staff is out. I'm not being clear, but
Yeah, I guess two different things. Part of the curriculum for virtual is asynchronous for Gurney students in science and social studies. Virtual students have dedicated staff members that do, teach them virtually. They do not come into the class like you'll see, in grades 4 and up. In terms of our ability to staff, I think your mitigation changes a little bit when, if you were to go all in, where you're now potentially shutting down classrooms of students, pushing them virtual for a period of time. That might be a mitigation strategy if you have, 4 fourth grade or 4, third grade teachers out, where you've got to move and make that adjustment. So it certainly, it certainly changes. The model is changing either way. Even if we pause and say we're just going to stay in hybrid for now, we have a number of students that are coming back from virtual that want to come into the hybrid. So there's a change occurring no matter what we do next week in terms of class sizes.
Bob, can you kind of give us some of that flavor of, I think we knew that about 18% of the population was virtual before versus hybrid. How does it shift? Like, what are the numbers now versus all in versus virtual?
Yeah, Jen pulled that together, so I don't want to steal her thunder. What can you share that out for district and buildings?
Yep. Okay, so right now at Gurney, about 24% of the population is all virtual. The plan, if we move to all in instruction next week, that all virtual drops to 15%. So we have students coming back into the all in model from the virtual. At the intermediate school, they're currently 23% of their students are all virtual. With an all in return, that drops to about 17%.
And how recently could have somebody changed their position, changed their mind?
I'll be honest with you, Phil. I think the principals have done their very best to stay flexible up even to within the last week of trying to accommodate that when they're able to. So I think everyone's trying to acknowledge the fact that parents are just trying to make the best decisions they can right now too. And so we've provided flexibility where we can.
And
I have heard from parents with Gurney age kids who feel differently now than they did even 3 weeks ago about being in the buildings, especially if it's full day. So that's one of the questions I'm getting is, if it's the reverse, if you had full day, if you had hybrid students and you want to now put them in virtual, are they going to get virtual support from the virtual teacher for the non-asynchronous learning part of the day? Or are they going to just get work pushed out from the classroom that they were assigned at the beginning of the school year?
No, the virtual academy would operate the same way that it's currently operating.
Okay.
So asynchronous work in science and social studies, and then virtual instruction in math and reading.
Okay, so the virtual academy can accommodate families who have decided that virtual is now the right choice as if it's between hybrid or full day.
Yeah, and remember the models are different, and it's not building wide. It's just because of age. The models are different 4 through 12. There's a lot more flexibility in 4 through 12 than there is K through 3. We do a lot more live streaming from classrooms in 4 through 12, which makes it very easy to bring kids in and out of, honoring the requests about Thanksgiving and all of that. Where Gurney is staffing very specifically for that virtual model.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say earlier. I didn't really fully understand the capacity, the extent of that, because in terms of my own family, I was thinking, well, if it gets to the point where it gets scary to us, then we just have him stay home, whether, you don't have to switch the identification to virtual. He can just continue to participate virtually in the classes that he's been participating in. But so now I have a better understanding of the complexity at Gurney. So thank you.
So continuing on that, if a cohort of Gurney students has to quarantine, do they become virtual academy students for 2 weeks, or do they do homework packets and stuff from their classroom teacher?
I think it would be quarantining the way it's happening now would be homework packets and communication. They stay in the classroom. I'm not going to quote Rachel, but if we quarantine an entire class or an entire grade level for 2 weeks, I would imagine it would flip a little bit. There would be some kind of virtual interaction with a large scale quarantine.
I feel like we kind of jumped in before Jen was able to give us her full update. And obviously we all are very engaged in this conversation, and we've all had conversations with community members and parents. And even I talked to some kids today about what they think about all of it. So, but let's let Jen continue her report on the incidents and the students, and then maybe we can circle back to some of the, more specific questions.
Okay, so since we started school, we've had a cumulative number of 13 student cases that dates back as far as actually the week before we brought students into the buildings for instruction. Since this past Monday, the 9th, we've had 5 student cases, and we currently have 8 active cases. So we have 8 students with a positive diagnosis who are in isolation protocol. When I look at those numbers of our 13 cumulative cases, 8 of those we know it is from family transmission. So it has been a parent who has tested positive, and then the child becomes symptomatic and then test positive. Of our most recent 8 that we have active right now, 6 of those are family transmissions. So that's 75% of our cases in the last 10 days or so are due to family transmission.
Are the odds that those kids came to school with COVID and they didn't pass it to anyone?
So the nice thing, I will compliment our parents across the district, because I do feel like people are erring on the side of being cautious. And we have had many parents who have called their child off for the day, citing the fact that they're waiting on test results within their family. So in those 6 cases, I want to be careful I don't misspeak. In most of those cases, the students had not been in the building because they had already been quarantined as a result of the parent testing positive.
But
So,
do they, when someone, like the parent might have had it, right? So there's a good chance a kid came to school with COVID.
well,
Anyone, right?
Yeah, we don't know for sure. What is happening is a parent will test positive, so automatically that child will have to quarantine because they're a close family contact. Then we see the child testing positive a couple days later.
Right. So,
So
the kid,
when we,
right. So the kid has it before that, though, based on what I know about the disease. Right?
it just depends. We don't know exactly when they would have gotten it from the parent.
I'm just pointing out there's a good chance kids came to school with COVID and didn't pass it to anyone, based on what
Yeah, that's quite possible. It's like Tom Quaid said, we won't know unless we could do random sampling of our students.
Yeah.
If I look at student cases across the district since the beginning of the year, we've had 0 cases at Gurney, 1 at the intermediate school, 1 at the middle school, and 11 at the high school. As a result of positive cases, we have had to quarantine students. At Gurney, currently, this is as of today, we have 7 students quarantined. Those students are all quarantined because they have a close contact who is a family member. So either a parent or an aunt or a cousin they have spent time with. At the intermediate school, we have 3 students quarantined. At the middle school, we have 2. And at the high school, we have 41. Questions?
Do we have any data, or do we know for any of those that have been quarantined, as a result of contact tracing hit, if any of those turned up positive?
That's a great question, Greg. We have 1 instance where we had a student test positive and then one of their close contacts tested positive. So we would suspect transmission. However, both of those students are both in Chagrin Virtual Academy. So they were not within our building. So the suspicion is they're spending time on their own together and probably transmitted it that way. All of our other cases, we are seeing no link between them.
Okay. Out of the 13 cases, 2 of those were virtual academy that never were in the building. But since they're part of the student population, they're identified there. Are those the only 2 virtuals out of those 13? Or
give me a quick second to double check that, but I believe so.
Because I'm just trying to get my head around like school transmission. So I'd almost factor those out. So I'd say 11.
Yes, I believe that is true. Only 2 of our 13 cases are virtual students.
Okay, so we have 11, and then out of those, all the other since the only quarantine that's turned up positive has been in virtual. So I guess I'd revise my question to any quarantine non-virtual. Have we had any of those turn up positive?
Not when there's a link student to student. So we've had quarantine kids turn positive, but it's because of a family member, not because of another student.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
The other interesting thing, I think, is of our 13 positive cases, 4 of them have been asymptomatic. So in those cases, those students have been tested because their parent has been positive and they too have then tested positive. So we have 4 out of 13 that were asymptomatic.
Right, but I guess, yeah, the one thing that of course we have no idea is has somebody been asymptomatic and just we never knew about it.
Absolutely, we'll have no way of knowing.
That's something we'll never know. Unless we tested everybody, we would never know that stuff.
Right. Other questions, thoughts?
I don't know if you're the right person to answer the question, Jen, but let's say, so if this is kind of a facilities student question, so if let's say on our current intended path of K through 6 next Tuesday, what would be the distance that we would be able to maintain, respective of different buildings?
Chris, you might be able to, or Bob, jump in on that one a little bit.
Yeah, I'll let Chris handle it. They've done some room configurations, and the answer is it's different, obviously, per building and even within classroom to classroom. Obviously, the intermediate school has a lot more space. to spread students out. One of the things I'd point out is the dividers that we kind of originally put in place kind of had a white border around them. Some teachers felt that that was kind of restricting students being able to see, so they chose to split kids up and pull some of those dividers down. We do have all new dividers that are more, they're not plexiglass, but you can see completely through them. So we'll have more pervasive implementation of that across the board. And then Chris, I know we've done a variety of room configurations, per building. Why don't you speak to, actual distances the best that you can?
Yeah, so we've done some room configuration specifically at Gurney because that's the most challenging place, just because of the room size and not the kind of room that we have at the intermediate school. So we're striving for 3 feet or greater at Gurney, and we think we can hit that in almost every situation. Some of it's some situations will depend on the percentage of kids that are going to be virtual. But I do know that Dr. Jones is working to balance classrooms. Like Jen, you're a bit aware of that, but I think we're trying to balance classrooms to come back so we can kind of equalize those numbers to spread the area out as much as we can in each of the classrooms. So that's where we're at. And again, we did purchase new desks for Gurney that we've implemented over the last month, and those are really giving us some flexibility. They're very similar to the desks that we have at the intermediate school, in that they can kind of be modular and move, and we can configure those, and they do fit as Dr. Ron said, those new desk dividers on the top as well too. So we're trying to provide the best environment. Then at the intermediate school, as I've talked to Mr. Howell in the last few days, they're trying to strive for certainly more than 3 feet, 4 feet, and 5 feet in places where they're able to do that. In some places, they're able to bring students out into the learning commons. Some of that is dependent upon what's going on in the classroom and how they can kind of move a portion of the kids out in the learning commons and provide supervision. And it just depends on what's going on in the class at the time, or what the learning instruction is. But they definitely will be more space, and they'll utilize the space at the intermediate school better to try and increase that distance between each student. And our strategy is really about keeping general as far space as we can, kind of maximize our space and get that with all of our students. And we've done the same thing in lunchrooms as well too. We've increased the number of lunch rotations at K6, and we've also put up dividers that will be used during lunch, and we're seating not every student next to one another, but every other, and we're trying to spread out as much as we can at lunch as well too. So that'll be new for us, obviously, feeding our students during the day, which we're not doing right now.
Just a question, Tom from Geauga mentioned like cohorting. Are we doing any of that, or is it all one person on one island?
I don't know the answer to that. I had not heard that as a strategy before. I'm not aware of that. Jen, are you aware of that at all?
That was the first time I had heard it in terms of a classroom configuration. I know we're using a cohorting approach with recess, because the all-in model is going to add recess to the mix, lunch, as Chris mentioned. And then the other area that changes from my perspective is transportation. We'll have more students on the bus than we do in the hybrid model right now. We had our first experience contact tracing on a bus for a high school student this past week. And thanks to seating charts and interview with the bus driver and video footage that we could pull up and double check, we felt pretty confident in the safety on the bus. But that is a variable for you to consider in terms of how it changes with an all-in model.
And Phil, I'll also say with cohorting, we're doing that on a classroom basis where we're reducing the number of rotations, between classes. We're trying to keep classrooms together. And if you look at lunchrooms and buses or assigning seats, to stop mingling as well too. And they're even talking, certainly at Gurney, I know, in the intermediate school, about strategies at recess for cohorting as well too. They've got plans for that as well. So I think the concept of cohorting is really there. I just don't know if it's applied to specifically how Tom talked about it, in regards to the classroom.
Chris, just as sorry, before you go to Bob, let me just follow up on Chris's. You said at Gurney, the goal would be at least 3 feet or more. But you also seem to indicate there might be some instances where we can't achieve 3 feet. Is that correct?
I don't know that to be true. I think the former is true. We are looking for and striving for 3 feet in every situation.
Okay. And then kind of, we've been asking about some different examples and kind of anticipating the impact of things. So this is kind of for you and Bob and Jen and really the whole team. And just kind of backing up a little bit, I think there's been some confusion about where the authority lies for making this decision. And so I want it to be clear to people who might be following our discussion tonight that it really is an administrative decision about the opening of school. And as a board, we approved the different models before school started. We approved the work that had been done for the all-in, for the hybrid, and for the virtual, and gave authority to the superintendent to use his discretion because he's really the closest to all of the information from the county health departments, all of the information on the impact to education and the staff, giving him the flexibility to pivot between those models. And I appreciate Bob, I think, and his team have done an amazing job of continuing to keep the board informed, to allow the board this type of an opportunity like we have tonight to really vet the decision and the thinking behind the recommendation to make sure that our questions are answered, that our community's questions are answered. But before we go too much further, Bob, if we could hear from you, I mean, I'm kind of reading between the lines, but I think it might be helpful. Are you proposing that we continue on the course that was originally set by you about 3 weeks ago to go ahead and make this transition in the K through 6 education buildings?
I am recommending that.
A change recommendation. You are?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any addendums, alterations, things that are different from the last time we talked about? Besides, obviously, the community spread, there's a lot of new information for us to all be thinking through, but have you amended what that would look like in any way, or is it?
We have not amended the way it would look like. I mean, we were going forward with the same preparations and putting the same things in place. Obviously, with the amount of community spread, I think the quarantine issue is going to be more a result of what happens in homes and the choices or families are making, and our mitigation and how we respond to that is going to look very different at the elementaries. And I covered in previous meetings the academic rationale and reasoning behind, especially at the K-6, getting these students back. There's significant pacing issues that we're looking at, our students not getting the content they need on a regular basis. And I think it's really important that we consider that not be the driving factor. Obviously, if I felt like this was going to put additional risk compared to where we're at now on our staff or our students, I would not be making the recommendation. The recommendation is based on what I have seen, not only with our own school data that you heard about tonight and that we talked through, but also watching the districts that have been in this environment already with the mitigation strategies that we've talked about, using the CDC recommendation of 3 feet and having success. However, it's just terrible timing, and I don't think there's going to be a good time to make this decision. But I also know, at least in one of our building, with the intermediate school, this transition actually sets us up better if we have to go to remote in 2 or 3 weeks. We pull kids out of their current science social studies environment and we put them in a position where they're better suited to make the transition to online or remote learning, if that's the recommendation and something we have to do. So I think, you know, my recommendation stays the same. I brought it to the board tonight because there's a ton of information out there. There's a lot of media attention, and hearing your input and your feedback and your questions is really important as you represent our community.
Bob, do you have bench strength planned for Jen and Chris? I imagine this is taking up a tremendous amount of their day.
They're not allowed to get sick. They're not allowed to take time off.
Well, no, that's a good question. What happens? What happens?
We have a great team, and we will all pitch in. I mean, that's just how we operate and what we do. I have not brought a recommendation. I know there's a district that's looking at actually contracting with someone to handle contact tracing. That's something that's out there that we can consider. I will, you know, if there's a lot of people online right now, I will tell you what will make or break this next couple of weeks will be subs. Chris is putting something out. PTO has put something out. I'll put a letter out tomorrow. You need a bachelor's degree to be a substitute. If you want to help keep us in and help keep us going, we need to build our pool. It is not student cases and spread in schools that are causing closing. It's the ability, the bench strength, and the capacity to put people, you know, subs people out as this happens. And it will be, in my opinion, it will be staffing and not cases that would drive us to remote. Obviously, with the exception of if we're ordered by the county or the recommendations come out from county, that could drive us there as well. But those are my biggest concerns right now.
So I think parents who would prefer that their students be in full day now are maybe asking the question of, so if the high school has made the schedule changes that need to happen in order to toggle quickly to full day, and you still have confidence around going full day at the K-6 level, do you want to speak to why you still, or do you still believe that January is the right time frame for 7-12? And do you want to just add some clarity to that?
I will say right now, I don't believe is the time frame to that. I don't necessarily, I could have a conversation in a couple of weeks and be open to that. I think you see our like districts doing this. And again, it's not from a case spread standpoint, it's the quarantine issue. You look at neighbors, you know, Solon and Beechwood, you know, Kenston's all in, they just have a much different facility, you know, that could accommodate additional space. It's the quarantine issue that we see potentially playing out with a lot of cases due to spread at home over the next couple of weeks that concerns me and pauses me from moving in that direction.
Bob, thank you. I really appreciate you clarifying that. I just wanted to make sure everybody
Can I put just a caveat?
Sure.
Just a kind of a caveat to that, I would be more inclined to do that if these numbers start leveling or we see a dip prior to January. That makes sense to me. I think the fallout we will see in our school is students getting it from either, you know, family events or things they're doing at home and being quarantining. Potentially we miss a few days of that. If we were all in during that environment, we could have hundreds and hundreds of kids on quarantine, and that would shut us and push us into remote. And I've tried to be pretty thoughtful about take steps forward and don't put us in a position where we have to take huge steps back. And that's why I think both of these are appropriate steps at this point. And I get it. I mean, you're hearing different messages from different school districts, and trust me, losing a lot of sleep over what is right here. But I think this is the best decision that sets us up either to just continue in this model, or, you know, if cases, you know, explode, and you heard from Tom, his letter comes out and we have to go remote, we're actually going to be in a better position to do that if we come in K-6 for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I just want to add that, you know, I don't think anyone, when they signed up for a career in education, anticipated that this is what their roles were going to look like. And I have a tremendous amount of appreciation for what everyone is giving to this to try and offer our students the best education possible. I think that the administration has done a phenomenal job listening. I'm the board, representing the board, I'm hearing from large numbers of parents, and everyone has different concerns and different comfort levels. And this is incredibly challenging to navigate. And I think the most important thing is that our parents and community feel heard by the school district. And I would say, from what I've seen, that everyone is doing a phenomenal job listening, maybe making decisions that don't align with one person's choice of how they would like to see us proceed. That's, going to be the case. Personally, I flip-flop on what I think is best for my family every 3 hours. So there's just a huge spectrum here of how to handle this and what makes families comfortable based on what they're doing, where they're working, what kind of family they're seeing, what they perceive as their individual risk. But I really need to commend you on the job that you've done listening to everyone's perspective. I think it's been tremendous. And I would like to say that I think that two of the things that make our school district as phenomenal and special a place as it is, one is the dedication of our administration and staff, that you're always willing to go above and beyond. And two is the parents that provide support and engagement to the schools. And I think that, if parents are watching and this isn't what they would choose for their students, they need to remember that we are stronger together. And it's really in the best interest of all of our students if we do what we can to slow the spread in the community and to support the district moving forward in the way that their administration is recommending, because they're making the decisions that weigh all of the trade-offs, including what's in the academic best interest of our students. So that's my PSA for the evening.
Well, thank you. And this is, the staff is to be commended. I mean, there's obviously a large element of concern with all of these decisions, but eventually everyone gets to the place we need to step up and we do the best we can with what's happening. And I know that will continue. So appreciate those words.
I definitely echo everything that Sharon said. I mean, the administration has done a fantastic job. We've all learned a lot more about community health, statistics, transmissions, and obviously we're all trying to take down data and read these tea leaves, and we're trying to project where they go. And when we ask county, health officials where they're going to go, they don't know. So, yeah, I especially like the comment, a year from now, we're all going to know exactly how this is going to play out, but it's going to be over by then. So I appreciate definitely, Bob, you and the staff kind of leading through the abyss, because that is what takes real courage as a leader, is to take limited data and make a call. So I definitely commend you on that. On the school board, I'll speak for myself, but I know I speak for everybody here, that everybody stands behind you in your decisions. So we'll do our best to support you. Do we want to move on to talking about athletics?
I just had one hopefully fairly quick question. And again, echoing the same sentiments that you're hearing. I think that you are showing incredible leadership, Bob. And I really appreciate that you have consistently kept the board informed. I mean, it's not just at these meetings. We are regulated and informed. And of course, we're all sharing with you the input that we're hearing from community members and parents, and that's all being incorporated into your decision making. So I appreciate the update about how quickly we can pivot, because that was one of the questions that I have. It sounds like intermediate school will be in a better position, but how would Gurney be if we had a surge at Gurney and we needed to take the building or a grade level down to the virtual? What would that look like? Especially because it's kind of news to me that students who are quarantined are really just getting packets of information. They're not benefiting from any type of virtual instruction if they were in the hybrid model. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how quickly we could pivot if this were to go sideways, and what that would look like at Gurney.
Yeah. First of all, that would be the last building I would, if I had a choice, that building I would keep in as long as I possibly could, because that is the most challenging building to educate students virtually. So, um, that being said, we've always handled long-term absences with packets and work and information for students. Now, granted, this is not a normal situation, but to continue to offer, we made a commitment to the families that are in the virtual academy that we weren't going to push them into an environment where they had some canned curriculum. To continue to be able to offer that and staff it in a way, um, we really need to kind of dedicate those individuals, and in an environment where we transition out. I think if we had to go virtual, we'd be in a much better place than we were a year ago. I just think the experience, I'll commend Gurney. I have a first grader, so I'm part of this decision from a parent standpoint. They've done some really creative things to keep their skills. My daughter was up, I didn't even know this was going on. I walk up to say hello in the afternoon, and the Gurney staff member had a 4:30 Zoom meeting with her class where they're practicing those skills and keeping those things fresh. So I think they're doing what they can to be ready to flip that switch, and it could be flipped rather quickly. But still, I think we just need to be honest. That PK3 is really tough to teach virtually. 412, I think, can happen very, very quickly, especially after we make the transition with the courses that we will make with an intermediate school coming back next week. So I think it could be done very, very quickly, and fairly seamlessly. We've talked a little bit about having students have their logins, have that preparation in place, and I think that's been pretty pervasive and consistent in the district. So I'm not concerned. I will be less concerned at the end of next Friday or the following week, having made the schedule changes at the intermediate school to flip very quickly than I am now, in terms of the quality of education.
So it sounds like there's still some things to be worked out with regard to Gurney. If you had a large number of, if we really had an outbreak in that building that required us to close the building, we wouldn't be in a position to transition immediately to some type of virtual environment for those kids. We'd have to work through that, or maybe that's work your team is doing now.
I think they're actually ready. They have a virtual schedule. The master schedule is already built. If they have to go virtual, they've been practicing the models. So I think, the key with having to move remote is you do want to do it as quickly as you can, because you're doing it to mitigate spread of the virus. So you don't want, if you make the decision to close because your cases are high, you don't want to delay that 2 weeks. Otherwise, you've cut into the benefit of closing down. So I feel like Gurney is in a position to have to move if we get there.
Okay. I don't know if I'm on mute or not. That's very reassuring, because I think our ability to pivot really gives me a lot more comfort in taking a little bit more risk for the benefit of our kids' educations, and getting them back a little bit more of that face time with their teachers, knowing that we're going to have more cases, as we just talked about with the health commissioner. There's absolutely going to be more cases, and we're prepared to handle those from what you're updating the board. So that's great.
You want to pivot to 712 sports? Maybe I'll just make some general comments for the board, and then I'll answer any questions. This is kind of an evolving conversation with school districts locally and even at the state level. As of today, the Ohio High School Athletic Association put a survey out, 2-question survey for school districts. And I unfortunately don't have it in front of me, but essentially it was, what is your preference? Continue on as normal? Do you want to press pause, bring kids back in January? So there's about 4 or 5 different options for school. So I think this is something that is evolving every single day currently. I've had a variety of conversations locally, asked Ms. Asher and Mr. Barch to reach out to the CVC, see if they had any interest in having kind of a meeting to come together My personal, if you ask where I was at, I'd love to see a bit of a pause where we're continuing to allow our students to practice in preparation to participate and compete in when we come back in January. I know there are others that feel that way. However, we're not at a point where that decision, we can make that recommendation or, feel like are far enough down the road with that. So it's kind of an evolving conversation. I have different sports. I have maybe different personal opinions on. I have to chuckle that in wrestling, their strategy, one of the strategies is you would not have to shake hands at the end of the match. That's one of the strategies. So some of this, there's a huge disconnect. However, I thought there was a huge disconnect in the fall with some of the things that we were doing. And by and large, we made it through pretty unscathed. I would echo what Greg mentioned. I think there's a big difference between competing outside is competing inside. We need to really look at restrictions in terms of who can come and be spectators in these environments. I know we've had some parents request, could we expand that? I don't foresee that happening. But I'm not at a point where I feel like I have a solid recommendation, but am making, inroads and having conversations with the league and other local schools about potential options right now.
So Bob, you would need the league support to, it sounds like your preference would be to have the kids practice, but not compete. And you would need the league to support that in order for it to happen across the athletic association. Is that correct?
Yeah, there needs to be some kind of continuity in this for them so we don't put ourselves in a position where our kids can't compete at all. I don't want to die on a hill and then our student athletes, are penalized for that. I think that there's even potential that you find 5 or 6 local schools and you make agreements that this is going to be our competition circle. And these are the things but some of those conversations have happened, but I will tell you, there's very different philosophies and thoughts, as many opinions as the board has gotten on how we educate kids and what to model. When you bring in, 15 or 16 schools, you'd be shocked to hear the different opinions. So we're just going to have to manage this conversation over the next, really, I think, 2 weeks and make some decisions.
You wouldn't be surprised to hear the level of passion at my dining room table around sports as opposed to academics. But so sure. I know what you're going through.
What's the if a soccer player had tested positive for COVID, would the whole team have quarantined?
Jen would be the better contact tracer on that one, but I would imagine the answer is going to be yes, or most of the team.
Right, yeah,
that was
for sure.
Okay, that's not going to be different so if that's not a new thing for the sports kids then. No. I was going to say that would probably definitely be the case for indoor sports. I didn't know if that was the case for outdoor sports. Okay.
Yeah, and you're seeing districts do some pretty unique things. There's districts that have football teams in state championships, and they've basically put their teams online virtually and quarantined them. And there's a lot of, strategies kind of being implemented to protect those kids.
Yeah, I think the greater threat to any season right now is just if the members of the team aren't safe or their family members aren't safe, because that's going to shut down it.
And we have that example right out of the gate, right? And there's a bit of luck and a bit of what you can control, and even in that case, there was no way to control that. That wasn't a choice issue. It's just some of this is we're going to have bad luck along the way, and the consequence is going to be quarantining. My older son's a runner, and one of the probably top 10 runners in the state of Ohio. The week before, sat next to a kid in class, and he got quarantined, and he didn't go to the first round of the regional. So those things are going to happen. We're going to try to do the best we can to make sure we have a season. But to your point and what's been said earlier, it's all about what those athletes do in school and out of school, and what families' decisions they make outside of school, because it all can come back and shut things down very quickly. one local superintendent likes to use the house of cards analogy quite a bit, and there's some truth to that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because sports and academics, obviously, and I think we're just hearing it underscored by the health department and by the governor's address to the state this week as well, that we're seeing not even huge gatherings, but, you know, family gatherings, or maybe a Halloween party that combines with a second Halloween party. And all of a sudden you have a new circle of people that are introduced, you know, into that group. And certainly with college kids coming home, as I understand from what the governor said, the majority of Ohio colleges will not be returning after Thanksgiving. So many of our families are going to have the introduction of a new family member who has not been part of their pod for the last few months. And, you know, if we can just proceed with caution, you know, I was even thinking it might not be a bad idea for college students to quarantine as they're being reintroduced into their family unit if they feel like there's any potential that they might be sick without symptoms. So anyway, I appreciate you underscoring that, Bob. I mean, we keep saying that over and over again, that we're all in this together, and all those decisions that we make as parents. And it's hard, you know, to say no to the sleepover or no to the pizza party with your best buds that you feel like you hang out with all the time. But as we do those things, we're introducing these new individuals into our units of, you know, people that we're interacting with, and that increases risk, unfortunately. So if we can all buckle down and get the kids back in school, you know, a little bit more, that'd be great if we can do that successfully as a community.
And I think I feel like I need to address the other side of this as well. And I've heard this in other districts, and it has not happened here. This is also a very aggressive pandemic, and you can do all of the right things and catch this, unfortunately. So someone who is that case doesn't mean they weren't doing what they need to do. And certainly we would never tolerate any shaming of students or anything like that. But again, it's this, and you heard it from the governor, if we can all kind of do the right things, it'll reduce the chances. And that's everything we're doing, is mitigating those things along the way.
Thank you. I don't mean to be shaming anybody or, with those examples at all. And I know everybody's making the best decisions that they can for their families at this time.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
I guess just a follow on to the sports. When do you expect to have a decision?
So as of right now, we're kind of moving forward. I had 2 phone conversations this afternoon that I'm going to circle back with. I wanted to talk to board tonight. These individuals are also talking to their board. I'm trying to push for the CVC to come together. Normally that's principal level that happens, but if not, we need to ratchet it up a little bit. So I would imagine I will have more guidance mid next week on if there's any changes. We'll also maybe hear back from OHSA on this survey. I have to tell you, I don't have a lot of faith in them, and they seem to be more reactive than proactive with things. So I would imagine I'll have some more information, mid next week on the direction things are going.
All right.
I was
Any other
wondering,
discussion?
Is the school gonna give any guidance to people who will travel for Thanksgiving or the winter holidays, that, maybe, even though if you were safe, you might want to self-quarantine or something, or?
Yeah, we've been trying to be very consistent with our messaging on, this idea that we're all in it together, without being preaching and trying to tell people what to do along the way. We haven't talked about any kind of release before Thanksgiving. I'm sure we're going to put something out with some guidance and some encouragement for sure.
Right, because a student can, or a family can decide, no, we think we need to quarantine, and they can attend they can't come to school, but they could keep up with their studies.
Yes.
If a family member, so in our case, we have a college student returning. If I decide that to sort of low-key quarantine for a period of time, do I call in absent and just say we're quarantining, but there's like no documented exposure? No, how do we handle I'm just going to keep you home for a few days to make sure everyone's safe?
Yeah, I would just call the principals to work through some of that. Again, the ability to manage that is really dependent on the building. We've had to turn those requests down at the elementary. I'd like to go to, or I'm planning on seeing grandpa over Thanksgiving. I'd like to have a week off and go put in the virtual. We just can't accommodate and do that. Whereas there's a lot more flexibility in 7-12.
The only thing I would say, if parents are listening and are, thinking about doing that, is we just ask that parents are transparent in sharing kind of their reason or rationale, because we're really trying to very carefully track the number of students who truly are quarantined because of a close contact to a positive case. We actually have an attendance code that we use at the middle school and high school for those students who are, we call it visiting virtual for, a week or a couple of days, because we really are just trying to keep a good hold of our data.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
I guess just, thank you for continuing this conversation. As I understand, there's a teacher workday on Monday. Is that right? Is that at Gurney and intermediate school? So this change starts on Tuesday?
Correct.
Okay.
Bus routes for parents, I had put a hold on them. Bus routes for parents will go out first thing tomorrow morning.
Well, I can tell you the crossing guards have changed their shifts for the intermediate school. So students who want to walk and not worry about getting on that bus, they still will be able to and have crossing guard coverage with the back to regular school times. And Bob, I know you'll keep us informed and you'll call a meeting if something were to change and, we needed to have another one of these discussions based on how things are moving in the counties.
Yes, certainly.
Okay. Anything else, Bob?
That's all.
Okay. I think next we're going to move into community comment. I actually have a email that I received from a set of parents. Ashley, do you have anything? Okay.
I do not.
It's like no. And Bob, do you have any others?
I do not.
Okay. All right. So this is an email that I received from Matthew and Annie Gasser. Dear Superintendent Hunt and board members, I am writing to publicly express our concerns with the current plans to return students to a full day of in-person classroom learning in light of recent record-setting increase in COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations, both in Ohio and nationwide. These increases have already resulted in the suspension of reopening plans across the country. Although we recognize the comparatively lower transmission risk that occurs within schools and among younger children, we nevertheless believe that an anticipated sharp increases in community infections ultimately will result in the increased risk of asymptomatic introduction of the virus to students and faculty. We have sincerely appreciated the countless hours of thoughtful planning which informed the students' district current hybrid model of learning. While anything short of the resumption of full-day in-person learning will be an imperfect solution throughout the remainder of this pandemic, we believe the hybrid model continues to offer the right balance of risk and reward by better ensuring adherence to the recommended in-person protocols of wearing masks and appropriate social distancing for shorter durations of time. Additionally, our 3 children at Gurney Elementary, the middle school, the high school, and the high school have enjoyed the hybrid model and have fallen into a comfortable, predictable routine that works. We believe transitioning to a full day return to school as we enter into the most dangerous phase of the virus unnecessarily disrupts the carefully considered balance the school district thus far has worked so hard to achieve and forces parents to choose between two extremes, neither of which is without its attendant costs. We recognize you all must contend with myriad voices within the community as concerns what is best for our children and excellent faculty and staff for the remainder of the school year. We remain thankful and grateful for each and every one of you and the important work that you are doing, and have every confidence that the decisions you all make have been and will continue to be made with the best information you have available and with the best interests of the students and the greater community at heart. Sincerely, Matthew and Annie Koster.
My response would, just to that, and I have received, other emails with the similar sentiment, and one, and I will respond to them tonight. I knew we were going to be talking about and working through this tonight. That we take this extremely seriously and have spent a lot of time agonizing over this decision. And trust me, there's no right decision because every decision has an opposing view and opposing side. We're trying to just take incremental steps moving towards bringing all of our students back in a way that our staff and our students are safe. And that will continue to serve as a priority as we move through the next couple of weeks and, honestly, through the remainder of this year. So appreciate the feedback, and we'll continue to try to do our best.
I know individually and collectively, we've all heard a lot of different voices around the community, which is good. That's what we want to hear so that we can make an informed decision. And we've combined that with, data that we've heard here tonight and picked up elsewhere, and try to make the best decisions possible. So
I would just chime in. I also, we're all saying this, we're all hearing from a lot of different people. And one of the things that really gives me comfort is this idea that we can pivot so quickly. So for parents that feel like, we are taking a little bit of a risk here, we are moving in a direction toward, more of that face-to-face interaction. It could work out great, but if it doesn't, we can move very quickly, either back to the hybrid or to a virtual model if necessary. So to me, that helps me be at peace with the risk a little bit more, if that might help anybody else.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to other business. Does anybody have any other business you'd like to bring up at this time? All right, seeing none. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, November 18th at 6 p.m. Via Zoom. And if I could have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, Ms. Brudno, if you would please take the roll.
Mr. Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Yes.
Mrs. Burrows,
Yes.
Mrs. Garvey,
Yes.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Please check your text so we can all stay informed with each other.